All right, is everybody ready? I'm assuming we're broadcasting live here, and I want to welcome everybody who's online, and go for it. So Darren's going to get me centered in.
Maybe.
Just squeeze the trigger. Isn't that fancy?
Very.
Just don't pull it. All right. All right, so those of you who are at home or listen in on your telephone, we're glad that you're able to do that. Hope that sooner rather than later, you'll feel comfortable getting back here in the room so we can have some fellowship with one with another and get your input about prayer requests and updates and things like that. But until then, we're going to continue to meet like we are. I'm going to start with a word of prayer. So if you bow your heads with me, and then we're going to be in Esther chapter 8. Father, thank you for, this is a beautiful time of year. The weather is so nice outside. It's been a beautiful day. And we're so grateful for all the things that you provide for us. We realize that it all goes back to you. And so we just want to express our gratitude and our gratefulness to all that you are and all that you've done for us and all that we know that you'll continue to do for us. And Father, as we prepare to look into your word, as we're coming close to the end of Esther, my prayer is that we continue to be able to glean some things in this very, very intriguing and interesting story, and that we would bring it to a proper close this week or next week. Father, I pray for those who are on our prayer list that we'll get more details about after the study, that we be able to glean all the information we need to glean to pray properly, Lord, not for your benefit, but for ours, as we can see you continually working in our midst, just like you worked in the midst of the people there in the days of Mordecai and Haman and Esther. And so we commit this night to you and ask that you would have your will and your way in everything. And I ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. As I said, it's good to see all of you. We're in Esther chapter 8. And in Esther chapter 7, we finally arrived at the point in the story. And I'm not going to go back and give a long recap because I don't see anybody that hadn't been here for a while. And so I don't think we need to review. Other than the fact to say that last week we arrived at the point in the story where Queen Esther had boldly declared that in fact it was Haman who was the evil mastermind behind the plot to kill all the Jews on the 13th day of the 12th month, or the month of Adar. And so she had declared that before the king and before Mordecai. And despite, or perhaps because, in part of his groveling and pleading, Haman that is, the king took immediate action and had Haman killed on the very gallows that were reserved or intended for Mordecai. So that's where we are. And, you know, in some cases you might think, well, that's a fitting end to the story. That's a good ending. So, you know, roll the credits. But we're not done yet. We've still got several more chapters to go. And I'm going to try to get through all of 8 and most of 9 tonight. So let's look at Esther chapter 8. And I can hear myself cutting out. And so before it gets any worse, I'm going to change these batteries real quick. So just give me a moment. All right, there we are. Esther chapter 8, verse 1. On that day, now what day is this? This is the day of the second banquet. This would have been, I believe, the day that Haman was killed. A lot happened in a 24-hour period. So it's that same day. It says, King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. Now, when it says the house, do you think it means like, you know, the 4 walls and the roof? What does it mean when he says the house?
Property, all property.
The estate. And it would have been pretty substantial, I would assume. He was a very wealthy man. He was the equivalent of the prime minister, the right-hand man to the king, wearing a signet ring. So this was a hefty thing, a hefty, very valuable thing that was given to Esther. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. Now, I'm assuming that means that she just told him, which would make it very clear. Remember, early on, we wrestled with the fact, well, who knows what? It seems very clear, based upon that verse, that the king did not know of their kinship, which would mean, and I think I may have, errantly told you early on, like maybe in the second lesson, that perhaps Mordecai got his position at the gate because of who Esther was. But based upon this, maybe she encouraged it without letting him know who he was, but there was no nepotism here. All right? He didn't get the job because he was the queen's adopted father/cousin. That wasn't the reason why, because the king didn't know that. So the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and he gave it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed Mordecai over the house of Haman. What a turn of events. Not only was Haman just the day before shamed when he thought he was going to be hanging Mordecai, but instead he's actually, and thought he was going to be paraded around the town on Air Force One with the royal robe on and that royal headdress, and he thought that was going to happen to him. He ends up having to do that, lead the horse around for Mordecai, and now even a greater turn of events where he thought Mordecai was going to die, he's the actual one who dies. And now, as if it couldn't get any worse, if he's looking down up from the grave, now Mordecai is the head of his entire estate or household. Mordecai also has his position. So he has his job, he has the order and care of his servants, his home, his property, his entire estate. And he now wears the signet ring that Haman used to wear. And all that happened in less than 24 hours. Get your head around that for a turn of events. In less than 24 hours, God turned everything on its end. Now, it might seem that that's the end of the story, that all's well. We just need to hear how Mordecai, rolled off into the sunset, and everybody lived happily ever after, and the queen converted Ahasuerus, and everyone converted to Judaism. That's all we need to hear, right? Well, no, it's not the end of the story, because there's still something that has to occur. There's still something looming in the background. And what is that thing that's looming in the background? Okay, the Jews. Anybody else?
The killing of the Jews.
Okay,
Right.
that edict. The edict that is irrevocable is still in existence. And so even though Haman might be dead, and Haman might not be the one leading the charge against the Jews anymore, that edict still stands. And so we've got to see how this unfolds. Now, I realize most of you know the story, but we're still going to pick it apart and look at it closely. Verse 3. Now Esther spoke again to the king. She fell down at his feet, and she implored him with tears to counteract the evil of Haman the Agagite. Notice once again, it refers to him as Haman the what? Okay, and who was Agag? Anybody remember?
One of the kings.
He was a king that should have been killed by, was it Saul or David? My mind is going blank, whichever king it was. But Saul. The command of God was to wipe them all out. I don't know if you could say that Saul had mercy or he thought had better plans or whatever, but for whatever reason, he did not kill Agag and even more members of the household. So that line of people still existed to this day. And so the writer points that out to us. With tears to counteract the evil of Haman the Agagite and the scheme which he had devised against the Jews. And the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. This was his way of saying, okay, come closer, I'm agreeing to talk to you about this, and so on and so forth. So Esther arose and stood before the king and said, if it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seems right to the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be. Notice how she's always conceding, apparently, to the will and the desire of the king, at least making him think that he's in charge. Let it be written so if I'm pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, here it is again, the Agagite, which he wrote to annihilate the Jews who were in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that will come to my people, Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my countrymen? Now, there's one person she leaves out who might be destroyed in all this. Who's that? Herself. I'm not sure if that was strategic, but it seems like a glaring thing. If the king really loves his wife, please don't let me die in all this. Now, here's my question. Can the king simply revoke this thing?
Once it's made into law, they can't change it, right?
It's irrevocable. The king cannot simply rescind what he's done. It's the same idea that was presented, as I told you before, when King Nebuchadnezzar, with Daniel in the lion's den. Remember, the king wrestled all night as to how he could save Daniel. But at the end of the day, when a decree or an edict is made by a king, and according to the laws of the Medes and the Persians, it is irrevocable. Why is that, do you think? The king was supposed to be perfect. In many contexts, the king was considered to be divine. And so for him to have to revoke something, then that would be saying, well, I didn't really know what I was thinking, I made a mistake. And that was unthinkable to the king. And so he's not going to revoke this, but that doesn't mean that something can't be done. Okay? Now in Daniel's case with Nebuchadnezzar, it was God who ultimately interceded. And Nebuchadnezzar basically submitted Daniel to the care of his God, who he felt could save him. That's not the case here, because as we know, God's not even mentioned in the book of Esther. But that doesn't mean that God can't act, and it doesn't mean that his people can't figure out a way around things. You might have noticed recently in the past, 2 or 3 weeks, that the government in Texas found a very, very interesting way around abortion laws. Agree or disagree with it, it was a very, very interesting tactic how to prevent, or not prevent, but to, what's the word I'm looking for? No, not legalize, but to make people less likely to want to get one in the state of Texas because of the economic repercussions or the financial penalties that they might incur. So that was one way that they found out around it. So people are used to doing this sort of thing, but we got to figure out how they're going to do it. So look at verse number 7. Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, "Indeed, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he tried to lay his hand on the Jews." So there's his motivation. It wasn't that he tried to lay his hand on his wife. We kind of talked about that last week. Was that a possibility? And it might have, in the heat of the moment, might have played a part in it. But at the end of the day, he claims that it was because he tried to lay his hand on the Jews. "You yourselves write a decree concerning the Jews as you please in the king's name and seal it with the king's signet ring. For whatever is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring, no one can revoke." So we have this riddle here. We have this problem. We have an edict that says the Jews must die, and they've been commissioned to write a second edict, which is not allowed to override the first one, but somehow must try to keep the Jews alive. And so, now I realize most of you know the end of the story and how this all plays out, but what are some other ways? What are some creative ways, given this basic structure of the riddle and the rules, what's another way that they might be able to figure out a way around this and save the Jews without contradicting or trying to revoke the first edict?
They could write a law that no Jew could be killed on that certain day.
Okay, all right. Well, that would kind of be contradicting the other one. All right? So you can't contradict it. Anybody?
I got 2 thoughts.
Okay, go for it.
First thought is that there's a decree that they should be given enough to get out of the land as fast as they want to.
Okay, so get them out of, because the edict says in the Persian land, in the Persian area. So maybe the king could talk to a neighboring country who he hasn't slaughtered yet and say, "Hey, I need a spot for about 15 million people just for a day, They'll come over, they'll, clean up for you, pick your grain, whatever, and I'll give you 20,000 talents of silver, and everything will be." Would that be a way to do it? Yeah, that's a way to do it. You got another one?
Yes, the other one was to declare that for that day they're no longer considered Jews.
Oh, okay. Now, I don't know that they would do that. I don't know that they would. It is creative, though, and I'm glad that if I was a Jew, that my hands aren't in the rest of all of you guys who offered up nothing. At least we have, one out of two good possibilities here. Yeah, I don't know that they would have denounced their Judaism, but you can see what the kind of thinking that has to go on, and I can't imagine what it must have been like as Mordecai and Esther, who had been apart for a little while. They don't have a lot of close contact because she's in the queenly quarters and stuff, and he's down there sometimes wallowing in the dirt and sackcloth to get her attention. So they're not really close speaking-wise right now, but here they are trying to save their people. And I might add, we haven't talked about this for a while, but in trying to save their people, this is the line where our Messiah comes from. If the Jews are annihilated and killed and destroyed completely like Haman wanted to do, we have no Jesus. Okay? And it wasn't like God could have just found another way, because he had already said beforehand that the way would come through the line of the Jews, through the line of Judah and things like that. And so if that would happen, that would have meant God couldn't have kept his promise. Okay? And the unthinkable would have happened with regard to our God and King. And so we can't let that happen. So let's see what they do. They're going to get creative. So the king's scribes were called at that time. In the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, so they have just short of 9 months. Okay? 9 months, a little less than 9 months, 10 days less than 9 months is when the 13th day of the 12th month comes, which is the day they're supposed to be all killed. So they've got plenty of time to think about this. But they've already figured it out. And so it says on the 23rd day, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded to the Jews, the satraps, the governors, and the princes of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces in all, to every province in its own script or in their own language and writing, to every people in their own language, and to the Jews in their own script and language, which should have been Hebrew. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, sealed it with the king's signet ring, and sent letters by couriers on horseback, riding on horses, bread. I didn't even notice this the first 15 times I read this. Bread from what? Swift steeds. Now listen to that. We still don't know what the answer is. But assuming they found an answer, give me 2 words that might describe that declaration or that edict. You have an edict that says you're going to die if you're a Jew on the 13th day of the 12th month. If there's an edict, a second one that goes out swiftly. Urgent, 2 words. Okay. I know you've been out of the teaching game for a while. And and gent is 2 syllables. Come on, folks. Good news. Listen, this is a picture of evangelism. This is the message that is going to restore life to the Jews. And it is so urgent. Look at what it tells us in this paragraph. That it's going to go out in every one of their languages, in every one of their scripts, to every one of their provinces. And this is so important that it's going out to all these areas with all these officials carrying it out. And they're carrying it quickly on these stallions, if you will, because this good news needs to be disseminated, and it needs to be disseminated in a way not only that the people receive the letter in their hands, but that it's in a language that they can understand. Sound familiar? Think about the Gideons and Wycliffe and all these folks who devoted great missionaries like, which one was it that spent all the time translating in India? Taylor. Was it Taylor? Was he a translator? Or Hudson? Judson. Yeah, Hudson, Judson, something Hudson. So Adoniram Judson. It was. Think about all these men, all these people throughout the years, who not only the scribes before there were printing presses, who copied the word down. Think of all the people who translated the Bible into various languages for it to go all around the world. Why? Why do missionaries give their entire lives to go this, there. Why did my wife and my family, why did we all learn Vietnamese? Because the Vietnamese needed to hear the gospel and hear the word of God in their heart language. Because no matter how well they learned English, that would never be the language that they could understand the depths of spiritual things like that. And so I think this is an example of such an important message. Even though it's not about life eternal, it's about a temporal life here, but it being saved and that being important, this message is going out. All right? Let's look at verse 11, because we still don't know what the solution is. Verse 11. Gotta have something to drink. This is so exciting. All right. All this riding with swift steeds just parches me. Verse 11. By these letters, the king permitted the Jews who were in every city to gather together so they could assemble and protect their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate. That sound familiar? Same words as the first edict. To destroy, kill, and annihilate all the forces of any people or province that would assault them, both little children and women, and to plunder their possessions. On one day, in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, a copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province and published for all people, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers rode on royal horses, went out, hastened, and pressed on by the king's command, and the decree was issued in Shushan, or Susa, the citadel. So, what was the solution to the problem?
You kill us, we're going to kill you.
Okay.
Jews could defend themselves.
Okay. Basically, the solution to the problem was they can defend themselves, which apparently was, while it being implied, if you think about the first edict without the second edict, basically, if they had tried to defend themselves, they would have been defying the desire and the action of the first edict by implication. Because this was the implication that they were all to die by the hands of these people, and to defend yourself would be defying that first one. This second edict didn't contradict the first one, but it clarified the fact, while the first one still exists, this new one allows this group of people, the Jews, to defend themselves. It allows them to assemble. It allows them to do whatever is necessary to attack whatever forces. I'm not sure exactly what that means. I don't know if that means taking out horses or, barricades or whatever, or tanks or something like that. I realize they didn't have tanks back then. You understand what I'm saying? So it allows them to defend themselves, basically to organize an army, if they need be, over these 127 provinces in order to defend themselves. You might say that they have leveled the playing field. Before, the playing field wasn't level. It was sloped pretty seriously towards the enemy. But now it's a level playing field, at least from what we see right now. But we're going to see in a little bit, not so level. Actually, it's slanted the other way now, but we'll see that in a minute. Look at verse 15. So Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white. Doesn't that sound nice? He sounds so handsome, doesn't he? I just can't imagine. Probably on a black stallion, a steed, they might call it, okay? So royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness, joy and honor. And in every province and city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. Then many of the people of the land became Jews, because fear of the Jews fell upon them. So, what was the response of the Jews and the Gentiles in Shushan when this decree came out?
Had a sudden conversion of people becoming Jews, so they would be.
Okay, so that goes to a later question, but we'll take care of it now. So Jim points out the fact that now you have people converting to Judaism, And why were they converting to Judaism?
Because the Jews were in power.
All right, because the Jews are flexing their muscles. It says here in that last verse that I just read, because of the fear of the Lord? No, it says the fear of the Jews. So they realize that the Jews are rising in power, and other than the edict, what else lets them know that the Jews are rising to power?
Mordecai's second in command.
Yeah, Mordecai, he's the prime minister. He's the king's right-hand man, and he's rocking a golden crown on his head, riding Air Force 2, okay? I'm sorry, I just really like that joke. I'm just going to milk it for all of its worth. All right? And so that's what's going on here. And so these people are converting to Judaism. Now, perhaps some of them are sincere, but for the most part, it seems that they're doing it for the wrong reasons. What was the source of now talking about the Jews, what was the source of their honor? It says they got 4 things in Shusha specifically, where the citadel was or where the palace was. It says that they had light as opposed to what? Darkness. When that first edict came out, it was like a dark cloud was cast over Shusha and the rest of the provinces, because these people were going to die. But now that the second one's come about, even though they've got to fight, even though some of them might die, even though there's going to be a war coming up that's going to last for 24 hours, they still have light at the end of the tunnel, you might say. But the last thing, so light, gladness, joy, gladness and joy, obvious, easy to understand. But where does the honor come from?
You would hope God.
Okay, all right. We've already mentioned it, I think. Mordecai. I mean, the second head guy in charge is a Jew. And so they're seeing him, and the text makes it very apparent that he is displayed in this royal garb, and it's made known to everybody that the Jew who used to once sit at the gate is now in the palace right next to the king. And so that was a real source of honor for the Jews. I think that's at least part of it. Perhaps there was more. Psalm 30, verse 11 says this: "You have turned for me my mourning into dancing." And this last part I really like. "You have loosed my sackcloth and girded me with gladness." Now you remember, I mentioned it earlier tonight, that just a couple days ago, I have to go back and look at the chronology, but just a couple days ago, I would assume, what was Mordecai wearing?
Sackcloth.
Yeah. He was wearing sackcloth and wallowing around in the dirt in front of the queen's quarters to get her attention. And now he's on top of a royal steed, clothed in royal garments, and he's the prime minister of the land. That's mind-blowing. It's cool. All right, let's go to chapter 9 and see how the rest of this unfolds. Aren't y'all thirsty? I don't see how you do this. Chapter 9, verse 1. "Now in the 12th month," that's the month of Adar, "on the 13th day," so it's here. Time flies, doesn't it? It just seems like 2 seconds ago it was the 3rd month, the 23rd day. "On the 13th day, the time came for the king's command and his decree to be executed." I'm not sure why they put that singular, because there were actually 2 that are getting ready to be executed, aren't there? There's 2, the first and the second one. "On the day that the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, the opposite occurred, in that the Jews themselves overpowered those who hated them. The Jews gathered together in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their harm. And no one could withstand them, because fear of them fell upon all people. And all the officials of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and all those doing the king's work helped the Jews." Let me read that again. "And all the officials of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and all those doing the king's work helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's palace, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces. For this man, Mordecai, became increasingly prominent." Do you think this guy's gained some power? Look at the words that it's using. Fame, great. Fame spread throughout the provinces, increasingly prominent. Verse 5 says, thus the Jews defeated all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, with slaughter and destruction, and did what they pleased with those who hated them. You know, we spoke a lot, and normally when you think of this story, when you think of such a time as this, who do you think about? Esther. Because Mordecai said to her, perhaps, not God has you here, because the word God isn't mentioned here, but perhaps you're here, you're queen for such a time as this. But do you see what I mentioned earlier, how the playing field's not level? It's not level, is it? It was like this before, sloped towards the enemy's benefit. And then we thought, okay, now we can fight back. We're on a level field here. No, we're not on a level field. God has completely turned it on in to where it is sloping to the benefit of the Jews. And why? What's the main reason? What's his name? Mordecai. Mordecai is this powerful figure, and he has ordered every possible official under the king's command, you're going to help the Jews. And so that's a great benefit to them. Not to mention the fact that he had so much respect by all the people. Either they feared him because for whatever reason they didn't like him, and you'll see in a moment there were obviously some people who didn't like the Jews, or they had so much respect for him because of his prominence and all that he was doing, his rise to power. And while God's name isn't mentioned, I'm sure there were a lot of people in those days who thought, you know what? The Lord must be behind this, because this simply doesn't happen like this. Things don't get turned on their end in 24 hours when that stake over there, that was erected 9 months ago was meant for him, and now look where he is now. And so all these things played a part, but sometimes we overlook that and we think about Esther as the title of the book, when actually God used Mordecai and put Mordecai in a significant place, in a significant position, and because of that, this whole plan was able to be carried out. Okay? Now, it still required Esther. Still required a lot of different pieces to go together. But right now, we're seeing Mordecai's significant role in all this. Let's look at verse number 6. Anybody have any questions, comments? Think I'm lost my mind? Okay. And in Shushan, the citadel. What's a citadel, Sid?
Fort.
A fort. Where the palace is? The royal, yeah. So this is significant because this is where like the military headquarters and things like this are, okay? We're going to see that word a lot here. That's why I'm pointing it out. And in Shushan, the citadel, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. Now, historians estimate, according to one of the sources I looked at, that this empire might have had well over 50 or maybe even 100 million people. So 500 men is a drop in the bucket. Not that their lives aren't important, but it's a small number of people compared to what you might think. Also, I'm not even going to try, okay? P Daddy, D Daddy, A Boy, P, and all these other guys, there's 10 of them. Verse 10, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, they killed. So Haman's dead, now his 10 sons are killed, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. Now, we're going to talk about this more later, but do you ever remember as a kid watching the cowboy movies and stuff like that, or the war movies, and somebody die, and they'd ride off on the horses, and as a kid, I'm just sitting there thinking, they didn't even check their wallets. They left that 6-shooter right there in that guy's holster. Why are they leaving all this valuable stuff behind? I did not understand that as a child, and I still don't. But apparently the Jews did, because they did not lay hands on any of the plunder. Verse 11. On that day, the number of those who were killed in Shushan, what's Shushan? The citadel, was brought to the king. And the king said to Queen Esther, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men in Shushan, the citadel, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is your petition? It shall be granted to you. Now, he asks all these questions and doesn't give her really a chance to answer any but the last one. It's almost like he doesn't care. I'm not really sure. Maybe I'm reading too much into that. where are we at? What is your petition? It shall be granted to you. Or what is your further request? It shall be done. Verse 13, then Esther said, if it pleases the king, let it be granted to the Jews who are in Shushan to do again tomorrow according to today's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. Now, first of all, there's no conflict here with regard to Haman's sons. Are Haman's sons dead?
Yes.
They're dead. So when she says, I want to hang them on the gallows, what does she mean?
Bring up their bodies.
She we talked about it a few weeks ago. I don't think you were here, but they put stakes in the ground and they would impale them. So these guys are already dead. They want them to be on display, and so that's what she's asking here.
Showing off.
Yeah, well, showing off or maybe intimidation. I think that's usually the tactic here, to strike fear into the opponents, would be my guess. And so, what is Esther asking for here? What's the goal?
Finally fulfill God's decree to annihilate Amalekite.
There we go. I didn't even have to go fishing for that one. He has mentioned, let me say that again. She's asking for another day because apparently she knows there's some people in Shushan, not necessarily outside of here, outside of the citadel walls. Because remember, this is the place where listen, if you want to take over the Persian Empire, you're not going to do it anywhere else except for at Shushan. Because that's where everything is. Just like Vietnam did not fall until Saigon fell, okay? Because that was the capital of the South when the country was divided. And so this is where this has to happen. And so she realizes after the first 24 hours, she must know that there's still some enemies out there. And so like Darren said, she's going to do what Saul did not do to the Agagites. Okay? Now, does she know that? I have no idea. I have no idea if that was in the back of her head, if Mordecai had taught her the history, and if they had had some tea one day and said, you know what, if Saul had just done his job, we would never have any of this because Haman would have never even been here. Whether or not she understands that, I don't know, but she does realize that if the enemy of the Jews is allowed to thrive or even exist inside those citadel walls, there's going to be a threat to the people. So she says, give us one more day. Not around the province, just here in Shushan. Or not around the rest of the empire, just here in Shushan. Everybody else gets to rest. And so, let's see what he says. Verse 16, is that where I'm at? 14, sorry. So the king commanded this to be done. The decree was issued in Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. And the Jews who were in Shushan gathered together again on the 14th day of the month of Adar and killed 300 men at Shushan, but they did not lay hands on the plunder. How many times have we mentioned that already? Twice. Go to verse 16. The remainder of the Jews in the king's provinces gathered together and protected their lives, had rest from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of their enemies. But they did not lay hand on the plunder. Now, there's a question here. When did they kill these 75,000 people? Because how do you kill 75,000 people when you're resting and enjoying, peace from your enemies? Look at verse 17. This was on the 13th day of the month of Adar. On the 14th day of the month, they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. So there's no theological implications here, but I want you to see what happened so you don't miss the story. So on the 13th, all over Persia, in 127 provinces, they are fighting, they're defending themselves, and they kill 75,000 enemies. In Shushan, they killed a few hundred, 300, 500, whatever it was. And she realized, Queen Esther or Mordecai or both of them realized that wasn't enough. So they said, we need another day. The king grants that other day just inside the citadel walls there, or inside the city walls, inside of Shushan, so they can kill those other 500 or whatever it was. While on the outside on the 14th day, everybody's already resting. The job's done. and they're at peace because they're not worried about the folks who might still be out there. Okay? And that was a strategic thing on their part. Now, something was mentioned in all of this 3 times in the text. 3 times that the Jews did not do something. What was it?
Lay hands on the plunder.
They didn't touch the plunder. In the edict, what did it say about the plunder? The second one, and the first one for that matter.
Take it.
Yeah. In the first one, take the plunder. You can kill them, destroy them, annihilate them, and take their plunder. In the second one, it said the same thing. In the second one, you can plunder. Didn't it? Or did I read it wrong? Said you can plunder. But for whatever reason, they didn't plunder. Why? Why, with all of that at their disposal, why did they not take the loot? In a place and in a time in history that's true even today, to the victor go the spoils. But they didn't do it. All they did was what was necessary to secure or gain their safety and their security from their enemies. And they did that in, I would assume, a minimalistic fashion, in a place where there's tens upon tens of millions of people around the Persian Empire. 75,000 people died. And so it's a relatively small number compared to the overall population in order to secure that.
How long before, when Saul made the decree that he was supposed to kill all the Agag?
Oh, this was a long time ago. Yeah, it was centuries before.
So they would have had time to sort of repopulate
Oh, yeah.
75,000.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the 75,000 wasn't necessarily Agagites. The key part about that was that it specifically says that Haman, who was at one time the prime minister, or the equivalent of that, that Haman was a descendant of the Agagite. And so that particular enemy, it wasn't necessarily, I don't know that you can necessarily say that all these people were related or affiliated with Haman. I would assume that in this point in time, there was just a lot of anti-Semitism going around for various different reasons, because these different provinces would have all been disconnected in a lot of ways with different languages and cultures. I mean, you're going from Ethiopia to India. This was the largest empire in the world history at the time. And so all these different languages, so they all would have had their own individual reasons why they didn't like the Jews. And I don't know that it would have all stemmed back to Haman. But the point was, the principle was, if you want to make sure your enemies don't bother you, wipe them all out. And so I think that was what the goal was behind God telling them to take out Agag, the king, and the rest of his descendants. If that makes sense. So what was the benefit? What was the benefit to the Jews, or the overall scene, to not take the plunder?
Make a point.
What would that point be?
When they were defending themselves, it was never about the plunder.
Right.
It was about surviving. They had no intention, no desire for the plunder. They just wanted to survive.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it might be the difference between those people over the largest empire that the world knew at that time, seeing the Jews as a bunch of barbarians, or a bunch of civilized people trying to do the right thing to preserve their own existence, and do that in as nonviolent, or with disturbing other people as little as possible. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the glory. This was about us just keeping on as God's people. And I think that if they had taken the plunder, they would have been viewed in a very, very different light. And while the text doesn't tell us, I think it does speak indirectly when it keeps repeating the fact that they didn't take the plunder. They didn't take the plunder. They didn't take the plunder. And I think that spoke volumes. And we might see more of that. We're not going to finish it tonight. We're going to stop here. But I think we'll see more as we see how the story played out. Because the next thing that's going to happen, most of you don't realize this, but there's a feast, a yearly feast. One of the yearly feasts in Judaism is the Feast of Purim, or Purim, however you say it. And that comes from the word purr. So they love cats. No, I'm just kidding you. Purr, I told you this on one of the first 2 lessons. Purr is the word for lot, or a dice. And what did the dice have to do with this story? it picked the day. Remember, Haman cast lots or rolled the pur, and the pur came up on the 23rd day of the 12th month. And so on the 13th and the 14th, it's a 2-day festival. They celebrate Pur. And see, I just blew my whole lesson for next week. But anyway, so they celebrate this every year, a 2-day celebration on the 13th and 14th, and it's called Purim or Pur because just as Haman cast the lots, we know that the Lord is the one who decided what day they would come up on, and that was the day that they would ultimately find their freedom from this temporal enemy and Haman and the rest of those people. Okay? Anybody have any questions? Would you guys like to watch the movie? Might take us a couple sessions. I've never watched it. There's several. I'm going to try to do some research to find the one that is the closest. But I don't know. I think it'd be kind of fun to see how it's portrayed, and maybe we can pick it apart. And now that we're studied up on it so well, we can find out what they did right and wrong, what they added, and things like that. Let me look into that. I will be here next week. Me and the boys are going to be heading out after prayer meeting to go fishing for a few days. And so we're looking forward to that. But I will be here next week. And so appreciate your prayers as we prepare to travel. We're going to be on a deserted island. Gilligan's Island. No, not Gilligan's Island. We're going to be out on the Outer Banks. And so if you need me, I'm sorry. It literally requires a ferry, and I don't think there's any cell phone signals out there. So this is the only way I can find any rest from you people, okay? No, I'm just kidding.
You deserve it.
Well, I hope so. I hope we catch some fish, but we're looking forward to it. It won't be because of lack of preparation, that's for sure. All right, well, I'm going to say a quick prayer for the needs as a whole, and I would encourage those of you who are listening online or listening on the phone or watching online to keep updated on Rachel's email and things like that. Please pray for what we have right now on the list, which you should already have by email on the website. Pray for those things. And if you have any updates, please don't assume that we're going to get the information here. I know with the 127 people that we have here tonight, we should be able to gather all the information. But you might have something that we may not know, okay? And so, no, there's not 127 people here. So let me pray for us, and then we're going to sign off, okay? Father, I'm grateful for the ability to be in your word. I just love it. It's so exciting. I love this story. I love the things that it shows us about your providential care and your sovereign hand in the course of human history. And Father, I pray that sovereign, loving, providential, caring hand would act in the lives of everybody on this prayer list. Those who are dealing with cancer, those who are awaiting procedures, those who are waiting for opportunities to open up in procedural rooms and surgery rooms with doctor visits, those who have been waiting for months to see a doctor about a blood clot in her leg, and those who have mystery illnesses that the doctors just can't figure out. Those, well, I guess like all of us who are getting older, some of us are a little bit farther along than others, and we're feeling our aches and our pains and our not being able to do things like we used to. Father, I pray that you'd help us to discover what the new normal is and maybe to figure out what we can do to make the new normal a little bit more like the old normal by making some life changes and things like that. But at the end of the day, we pray that whatever measure of health you would bless us with, that we would use every single drop of it, Lord, for your good and for your glory, for the good of those around us, Lord, for the furtherance of the gospel, for the strengthening of your church, for the equipping and edifying of your church. Help us to do that, Lord. For those of us amongst the flock who may not have figured out our part in all this yet, about what our role is and what our gifting is, would you help us to discover that? Would you help me and the rest of the staff and the what's the word I'm looking for? Those who might be able to see that gifting in others, to point that out to them and help them and encourage those giftings, Father. Pray for our young people, for our youth, for our children, for the seniors who might be sick or shut in and not able to be here tonight, Father. Wherever they are, whatever we're learning, whatever leader we're with, whatever program, I pray that you would just strengthen us in it all and help your will to come about in our lives. I commit the rest of our time to you, that we'd be able to gather the information that we need. and that we might be able to pray accordingly. And I just ask that you would bend your ear down from heaven, hear those prayers, and answer them according to your perfect will. I ask it all in Jesus' name.